Hi, my name is Francine Blythe, and I am the Executive Director of Vision Maker Media. Vision Maker Media was established in 1976 and is headquartered in Lincoln, Nebraska, in the middle of the Upper and Lower Plains. This year is our 45th anniversary, and we're very proud and happy to be collaborating with Pioneer's Indigeneity program to present this panel today. Before I introduce our moderator, Cara Romero, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous people whose land we are on here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Vision Maker Media is located in Lincoln, Nebraska on the University of Nebraska campus, a land grant institution. Together, we acknowledge that we are located on the past, present, and future homelands of the Pawnee, Ponca, Oto-Missouri, Omaha, Dakota, Lakota, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Cause people, as well as those relocated, the Ho-Chunk, Iowa, and Sacafox peoples. This acknowledgement and the centering of Indigenous peoples is a start as we move forward together. So let's pause for 30 seconds to consider the years of displacement, removal, settlement, and survival within this land and country. Thank you. Now I would like to introduce our moderator for this panel, Cara Romero. I personally know Cara as an extraordinary contemporary artist in photography. She is also an extraordinary advocate for Native peoples' authentic representation. She is the co-facilitator of Native environmental issues and topics that are presented at the Pioneers Conference through the Indigeneity program. There, she co-produces the Indigenous Forum, original media, educational curricula, and catalytic initiatives to support the leadership and rights of First Peoples, while weaving networks, partnerships, and alliances among Native and non-Native allies. As once best said by LaDonna Harris, founder and president of Americans for Indian Opportunity, she said, Indigeneity assumes a spiritual interconnectedness between all creations, their right to exist, and the value of their contributions to the larger whole. At the core of Indigenous thinking is that coexistence relies on the ability of all peoples and living things, voices be heard and heard equally. And now I'd like to let Cara continue on with the panel and introduce the panelists.
Francine, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm so honored to be here with my co-panelists today, so honored to be working with Vision Maker Media on this really important series in honor of Earth Day and this month that we celebrate Mother Earth. My name is Cara Romero, and I'm an enrolled citizen of the Chemehuevi Indian tribe. I'm very happy to be calling in today from my homelands, which are on the California waterfront of the Colorado River and deep in the heart of the Mojave Desert of California. So land acknowledgement to my community and to my peoples today. I am the co-director of the Pioneers Indigeneity program. It is a Native-led program within Pioneers that seeks to bring people together in critical dialogue around creating visibility for Indigenous peoples and issues and voice in global conversations around environment and social justice. And today we've partnered with Vision Maker Media to create this in-depth panel discussion with some subject matter experts I'm really happy to be here with today about how Indigenous environmental leaders globally are coming together to adopt rights of nature into tribal governance to protect Mother Earth and Indigenous rights. This panel is in partnership with Vision Maker Media, and the idea that a feature like nature or a river is a living being is nothing new to Indigenous peoples. And so it's not surprising that Indigenous peoples are at the forefront of this growing movement to acknowledge the legal rights of nature. I'd like to introduce you to 3 panelists and accomplices in this work that joined together today to talk about a variety of issues around adopting rights of nature into tribal governance. First, I'd like to introduce you to Penny Opal Plant. Penny Opal Plant is a longtime activist, educator, and leader. She is a descendant, non-enrolled, of the Yaqui, Choctaw, and Cherokee people. She is also the founder of both San Francisco Bay Idle No More and Movement Rights. I'd also like to introduce you to my dear friend Dion Ben from Navajo Nation. Dion Ben is the director of the Native America program of the Grand Canyon Trust. And Alexis Bunton is my very good friend and co-director at the Pioneers Indigeneity program. So without further ado, I would love, Dion, if you would, to do another more formal introduction of yourself in your language and start us out in a good way with prayer.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Vision Maker Media, and everybody that's listening in today. I'm from the Navajo Nation, so I'll introduce myself in Navajo and then go into the prayer, which will be in Navajo as well, just to get ourselves set and properly, mindset, properly set ourselves up for our conversation today. So, Yate Ade Alsko, She Dion Ben Ayin She, O one Sannen Shlon Ashihi Bashichin, Oge A Dashiche, Do Kenchine Dashinale. Let us go ahead and go to prayer to the Creator and be thankful for all the blessings and continued protection. Ko de ya distingue do nasto nage in linigi ko ba heta nitzen ko inawalie inayat do inapahojonigi ko ya nasto nage obinie go ko asani tlo kodo ko de ya bala ashlai ni lini kodo nasto nage yat ko nani katolinsin eben nacho kodo ni tsohatil zendole Alskote go, Hojana has lito got, Zilpakake, Kotanliko, Satana Ago, the Halgreko, Alskoteko, Nijano K wheat idolis, Anilsko, Belashlanit lini. But Hojana has lito listens and go conage and sartizan. Hojana has sleep, Hojana has sleep, Hojana has sleep, Hojana has sleep. May there be beauty restored, may there be beauty amongst us, and may there be beauty ahead of us. Thank you, Cara.
Thank you, Dion, for connecting us in that deeper way as we go into work that we're all very passionate about. And again, it's an honor to be representing the many that I would like to acknowledge that are working on this growing movement globally. There are many elders and people that have come before us. So thank you for the opportunity to share in an educational way what we do know. And we are going to go around with some themes that we've identified that we feel like will help share and grow people's understanding of what the movement is, where it's come from, and what some current events and news are with rights of nature, or sometimes we call it rights of Mother Earth. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. We will address those towards the end of the panel, and we will be able to see those. So without further ado, we'd like to go into kind of our first theme. Each of our panelists will speak to these ideas And then we'll move on to the next one. And panelists, feel free to join in conversation or speak to something that you've just heard as well. First, we'd like to go to Penny, and for the first round, we'd like to talk a little bit about the foundation of rights of nature. Where have we come from with rights of nature, and where do you see things headed? Penny, can you start us out with your deep knowledge of the history of the rights of nature movement?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, so I first want to thank Dion for that beautiful prayer, and also send my gratitude to Vision Maker Media and Pioneers for this time that we have together. So I'm just going to start with what we know. We know that life on Mother Earth's belly has been gravely impacted by capitalism that's led to corporations which are out of control and destroying what life needs to simply exist. As it safely existed, mostly in its present form for hundreds of thousands of years. And we already know that there are aspects of the system of life, non-human relatives, bodies of water, glaciers, and so on, that are now damaged beyond what we know we can help restore today. So the rights of Mother Earth, or the rights of nature movement, is a way forward to regaining a lot of the balance that has been vitally damaged by corporate systems, extractive industries, and so on. And the forerunner to the rights of Mother Earth, the rights of nature. I like to use the rights of Mother Earth because as an Indigenous woman, that's what speaks to me. And the term the rights of nature to me seems like a bridge toward when all of our human family understands that the earth is our mother and provides everything that we need to live. So anyway, the forerunner to the rights of Mother Earth movement was Ecuador, which in September of 2008 codified the rights of nature in its constitution, and it had a lot of Indigenous input because the rights of nature, the rights of Mother Earth, that movement is about aligning natural human laws with the natural laws of the planet that we're fortunate to exist upon. And there was a lot of heated discussion, of course, about putting this into the Constitution. And one of those discussions concerned the right of Indigenous people to oppose or approve development projects in their territories. And for those that don't know, there's a long history of extractive corporations destroying the land and the water of isolated Indigenous people in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And some of you probably know about the ongoing lawsuit between Ecuador and Chevron. And in the end, for the Indigenous people, unfortunately, consultation won over consent. And we know Indigenous people around the world how dangerous that is for everyone. So fast forward 2 years later, the People's Climate Summit happened in Cochabamba, Bolivia, where 30,000 people, many of them Indigenous, met to discuss the state of the world, the climate, and the environment. And some of the Indigenous people walked for hundreds of miles to be there. That's how important this climate summit was, and still is. So it was during the summit that the Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth was written, with a lot of input from Indigenous people. And initially, the idea was to take it to the United Nations and to go through the process there to get it formally recognized, but that didn't result in success. And anyone who followed or knows about the process of getting the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples through the UN knows that it took about 20 years to pass. So really, we don't have 20 years to put that much energy into getting it passed in the UN. We're really out of time on a lot of things for survival. So that, as far as I know, has been put aside. But those of us who've been working on the rights of Mother Earth for many, many years have been happily surprised by how quickly this movement has spread. So during the first 10 years or so, we were very aware of every rights of nature statute that was passed or constitution where it was put into and when and where that happened, but that's not the case anymore. We hear about countries, tribes, communities that are passing rights of Mother Earth and rights of nature laws, writing it into their constitutions, passing resolutions. So it's a very, very exciting time to be here and to be part of this movement. As Indigenous people, we understand that we're not separate from the sacred system of life. We're profoundly and humbly a small part of the system. We're actually one of the newest natural life forms. So we can't separate ourselves from water and the spirits of water. We are water. We can't separate ourselves from the air and the spirits of the air, which flow in and out of us. We're literally related to all of life on Mother Earth's belly. We all came from her. And as my mentor, Casey Camp Hornick, says, we are nature protecting itself. And I highly recommend taking time to dive into the Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth that I mentioned. And you can do a search for it online, and it can also be found on the Global Alliance on the Rights of Mother Earth website at therightsofnature.org. So thank you, and I think now it's Dion.
Dion, let's talk a little bit more about the connection to traditional values and how we see rights of nature working within our tribal communities.
Yeah, Kara, I'd like to share a little bit on that. That'd be great. I think that one of the foundations or the foundations of what's happening with the rights of nature has been based primarily on how Native peoples across the world have been reigniting or reintroducing their relationship to their landscape, to their environment. And that long time-tested practice and that relationship that existed between Indigenous folks across the world to the environment has become the foundation of what we've known to be how we live in existence with our landscape. And because of that, that's become the foundation of the rights of nature movement. And there's a lot of terminologies, there's a lot of concepts that have been modernized or contemporized by not knowing the full extent of what we're talking about when we say Mother Earth or Father Sky, or our relationships to the brother bear or the brother animals or the sister animals or the plants. And I think that comes back to understanding the foundations of what we're referring to help set the stage and help understand that what we're explaining and what we're sharing is the basis of how exactly what Penny had mentioned, how we are part of that community, how we are not separate from landscape. And those are the primary foundations and pillars of Indigenous philosophies, Indigenous teachings. And it's a way of guiding all life, not just human life, but the animal life, the bird life, the aquatic life. And having all these systems and cycles understand their place to have a functioning environment, a functioning community. And I think that goes into building the blocks of understanding what the rights of nature is and how the rights of nature has been formulated and been led by tribal communities, because we've, as tribal members, have that knowledge in our community still. We have it in our songs, in our prayers, in our way of life. And so if we take a step back and look at, for an example, if we look at the Mother Earth and Father Sky and understanding what those terminologies mean. From my culture, from the Navajo society, when we refer to the earth as our mother and the sky as our father, it's a relationship of life. And so if we look at that relationship with life, we understand the properties of how to treat and how to live amongst these entities or these beings. And when we look at that relationship, we understand our place. We understand the place of protection. We also understand the place of danger. We also understand the place of balance. And having understand that the earth is our mother, we understand that relationship can provide nourishment, and that relationship can also provide discipline. And that relationship can also provide guidance. And looking long-term, looking at, some of the medicinal plants that Mother Earth provides us. The watering cycle, how the watering cycle provides clean water for life. And those are levels of guidance. So understanding those components and building up on that, we understand how our relationship is with Mother, the Earth. And the same with the Father, the sky from Navajo societies. And I'm pretty certain that it stretches out, and it's the relationships we have with the environment are very similar across the board, across the world with Indigenous communities. It's understanding what we mean by kinship to the earth, kinship to the elements of air, kinship to elements like the plants that we live around and how they control the carbon cycle. So these relationship and understanding kinship is the foundation to understanding, oh, these entities, these beings, these relationships we possess are unwritten scriptures or unwritten rules to living a balance or living as part of a community. And I think that's where the foundations come from on the rights of nature. So when we talk about the rights of nature, the rights of, for an example, one of the biggest components that, one of the biggest beings or elements that have experienced a lot of rights of nature designations is rivers. So if we look at a river and we look at the foundations and the relationships to river, we know that the property of water is important. And we understand the significance of water in our humanistic daily lives. But water in its survival for itself, to provide for self and to provide for the environment, creates a foundation of spanning out beyond just self or beyond just individualism. And looking at the rights of a river, you really begin to understand why the river has its property to survive, because it could take life as well as give life, as well as guide life. And that's transitioned all the generations of who we are. And that's how we become observant of these ordinances, natural rules, natural laws that we follow as Indigenous people. And so if we break those down and establish that as guidance or as guiding factors to the rights of nature, we're not just allocating another policy, or we're not just designating another law. It's actually empowering what already exists to help shift humans and begin having this new relationship that once existed with our landscapes and being part of that community. So when we look at the Rights of Nature Foundation, it's not just reigniting, or it's not establishing something new. It's establishing something that existed and readjusting to a lifestyle that we know across the board, whether you're Indigenous or not. Everybody comes from a place of origin, and from that place of origin, all of these natural ordinance exist. And so reestablishing those relationships and putting yourself in a place where you understand kinship to landscapes, to being part of that community, that's the foundation of where the rights of nature is coming from. And that's what's helping guide this movement as Indigenous communities throughout the world are building up a rights of nature campaign, or a rights of nature, or rights of Mother Earth designation. It's based off of those philosophies. And you could use any example across the board, but that's just one that I wanted to share with you, because it's something we hear very often is Mother Earth and Father Sky, and how do we dive deeper into that relationship than just saying Mother Earth and Father Sky. And I think that's what we've all been working on, is really dissecting those relationships to be the foundations of the rights of nature. So that's just something a little bit to share based off of what I've observed working on the rights of nature for so long, and also what I've observed in comparison and putting into practicality some of the teachings that I have from my Navajo people and the people of the Colorado Plateau as well.
Thank you, Dion. That brings up so many questions about the difference of traditional beliefs and the legal frameworks that we're currently operating under. Alexis, I'd love to hear you talk about that. Can you expand for people the current legal frameworks and how these differ?
Mm-hmm. Well, living in a settler colonial nation state, we do have our legal frameworks inherited from basically English property law, which is all about what Penny said, It all comes from capitalism and thinking of nature as an object that can be extracted from, as opposed to something that we are related to, like Penny and Dion were saying. So with the foundation of the rights of nature movement, if people aren't aware of Indigenous worldviews and our perspectives, they might think, some people say that this idea got started when a legal scholar named Christopher Stone wrote an article in 1972 called "Should Trees Have Standing Towards a Legal Right for Natural Objects?" And of course, the first time I saw that, people thought that was the founding moment of this movement. I laughed, and everybody else who's Native laughed too, because we knew that we thought that way since time immemorial. So it's not that groundbreaking of an idea. And if you think about it, the US has only been around as a nation for a few hundred years, but nature's, Mother Earth's natural laws are going to be here long after long after things have transformed, and she's righted herself. So I think what we're doing with this movement is really trying to get the legal system that we live under as humans in alignment with natural law. And it's the tribally led rights of nature movement has a lot of exciting potential in many different ways. For one thing, the United States would not exist if they didn't recognize, if the country didn't recognize Native nations' inherent tribal sovereignty. In order to get recognition as a country, what is now the United States had to sign international treaties with what are our Native federally recognized governments now. Otherwise, they would have just been seen as a bunch of, rogues from the English colonies that were just trying to break off. They wouldn't have been legitimate in any way. So sovereignty has everything to do with rights of nature, because now we're at a moment where federally recognized tribes have an opportunity to exercise their sovereignty to codify, put into law rights of nature laws, like Dion was talking about. We have things like personhood for rivers, which tribes are starting to do, personhoods of certain plants, like the rights of Manuman, which the White Earth Ojibwe did, and even landscapes and sacred sites, even and the waterways, and the right to, and they have the right to, and the US government has to accept that, because we have our own sovereign nations onto themselves. And this is not, while this has not been challenged in court in any significant way or any way at all, we have seen that when non-native cities and municipalities adopt rights of nature ordinances, that sometimes they've been attacked by these multinational corporations, which are the ones that lobby our state and federal governments. And when they attack the cities that try to exercise their own grassroots democratic rights to help support nature, those cities lose because they can't afford to fight the battles. But with sovereign immunity comes this concept, with sovereignty comes this concept of sovereign immunity, which in legal theory means that if tribes adopt rights of nature, that they probably can't be sued for trying to uphold it. And so, of course, since the 1820s or so, the Supreme Court has flip-flopped time and time again on what tribal sovereignty means. Right now, we're on a good 20-year stretch of the US Supreme Court upholding tribal sovereignty and how we can exercise that. It's been a good 20-year run of that. So there's a lot of really great opportunities for tribes to build the capacity, if they want to adopt rights of nature or personhood of an ecosystem or a plant or a river. And that not only would it help ourselves out on our tribal trust lands, but it would also help all those people downriver, for example, which is why the No DAPL movement was so widely accepted, because people understood that the Missouri River didn't just go through one corner of a reservation. It cut across, bisected the entire middle of the country. It was very easy for people to understand that if there's a spill on that river, if it got contaminated, it would hurt a lot of people. So it's really, really exciting. And but there are some potential challenges to implementing rights of nature in Indian country. I know you and I have talked about some of those, Kara. Would you like to expound on that?
Yeah, when Alexis and I became really interested in it after hearing Tom Lindsay and Mari Margol from, then they were at the Center for Environmental Legal Defense Fund. And we saw all of these connections that many people were seeing simultaneously globally, that rights of nature or rights of Mother Earth needed to be in tribal law, but how do we get there? Like, how do we enact these things? And we began, sharing information with people that had already been doing the work, with people that had actually adopted rights of nature into their governance, and then, working with Dion in our ways of cultural protocol, like, let's just sit down and discuss this, right? Like, let's talk about all the things that we're talking about here today, and what does this mean, and might this be the right path forward? And as we were looking at what we needed, it was definitely wanting to create language and like educational spaces where we could both discuss and follow cultural protocol around how we enact changes in leadership and government, and apply laws to our lands, but also really wanting to remove obstacles for tribes that want to do it. Like, I'm from a tribe that was instantly sees the power of shifting language in our tribal governance to protecting the Colorado River, the flora and the fauna, the resident animals. And we currently don't have any of those things in our tribal constitutions. And we realize, like, we're not alone. There's a lot of tribes, that have these boilerplate 1934 IRA constitutions that don't speak to any of our traditional values. And so we definitely have been working in that space of how do we gather information and share information about the rights of nature, and how do we remove obstacles for people to learning about how they might be able to implement constitutional amendments or ordinances or adopt resolutions into tribal governance. And that's that's really the space that a lot of us are at. There have been some incredible stories, and if you start paying attention to rights of nature globally, they're doing this. They're doing this in New Zealand. They're doing this in the United States. And we anticipate that many people are going to begin doing this. But there is a current, like what Alexis was speaking to, we also identify that current laws fail us. There are many laws within many jurisdictions that are supposed to protect the environment and tribal and indigenous rights to protect environment, but we often see those fail. And so the other side to just adopting them into our own tribal governance is seeing if we can find ways to strengthen them even further. So not just reclaiming language and spirituality in our governance, but also seeing ways that we can embolden and the enforcement of these things. So that's a perfect segue into our next section of conversation. And that's what, Penny, if you could just start us out and talk a little bit about all the exciting things that are happening and what are people doing to enact these things? Like, what are you working on right now?
Great, thanks, Cara. So yes, Movement Rights has been working with the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma for many years now, and on just this topic. And the way that we moved forward was based on what we learned when we took a delegation of mostly Indigenous people, and Dion was a part of that delegation, to visit the Maori to find out like what their rights of nature movement looked like, how was it organized, how did they talk to people. And what we found was that they really took their time. They had at least 2 years or more of community meetings with not only the Maori people, but the other people living on their territories, mostly white people, to really explain what this means. So what does it mean when the Wanganui River's rights are recognized? What does it mean when the Te Urewera mountain ranges rights are recognized? How does that work? Can the river sue us? Like all of these really thoughtful conversations had to happen first before that agreement was reached. And even when we looked at India several years ago that recognized the rights of several of its major rivers, the work hadn't been done on the ground. And so people were very confused, and they actually had to roll that back a bit so that they could have these community conversations. And I think when we're talking about Indigenous communities and Indigenous people, you know, most folks understand what we're talking about because of the original instructions and because of speaking of Father Sky and Mother Earth and the spirits of the water and the air and the fire and so on. So it's a much easier transition to be made, but it's still important to have those community conversations and to share what's happened in other parts of the world with other tribal communities, and how that's rolled out in other parts. And so when we went into Ponca, we had these community meetings, and we invited people from other tribes in Oklahoma to attend too, and they were very engaging. The people asked a lot of great questions. They, you know, got the answers that they were looking for, and that part of that with the other tribes in Oklahoma was about planting seeds. So in Ponca, the Ponca tribe was the first tribe in the United States to actually pass a Rights of Mother Earth statute. And Casey Camp Hornick actually got on the tribal council, they call it the business council there, in order to work within that setting to get this statute passed. And now they're working on the rights of the Arkansas River and the Salt Fork River. And in each place, like in Aotearoa with the Maori people, and in Ponca with the rivers, there are guardians. So in Te Urewera mountain range, there are guardians. In Aotearoa, there's a government crown guardian, and there's a Maori guardian. So on the Ponca tribe, there will be the Padata Women's Society will be the guardians of these two rivers, which is very powerful because as women, we have a greater responsibility toward the water. We have more water in our bodies. Our babies are born on waves of water and swim around in our wombs when they're inside. So that personally just fed something really deep in me. And so that they haven't passed that yet, but it you know, really could be any day or any week now. And so those are the things that are happening that Movement Rights is working on and with. And we've also participated and helped organize tribunals, which are really effective. And so, you know, at COP in Paris, the UN climate conference, that's the one I remember the most for some reason, but there were several different topics that were tried at that tribunal. And even though, you know, I'm relatively well informed about a lot of environmental harms, I learned so much at that tribunal. And so tribunals are another way, another tool in our toolbox to help people understand what the harms are in where they live, and what are some of the solutions to those harms, like passing rights of nature laws or putting them in the Constitution. And so there's also the Global Alliance on the Rights of Nature that Movement Rights was a founding partner in. And recently, there's been a new development there where there's now an Indigenous, I'm really sorry, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's an Indigenous arm of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. And Casey is the lead person of that. And so it's something new where there will be Indigenous people that will be meeting and gathering and talking and sharing information from all around the world. And I think that will help create a stronger foundation for all of us moving forward.
Sorry, Dion, if you can talk a little bit about what you're doing at CPIC, and I'm just going to do a time check, and we have about 20 minutes.
Thanks, Kara. I think that it's just to set the stage a little bit. I think that how we are shaping and how we've shaped our conversation really leads to what we're doing now. So it's really good to talk about what's happening currently in our efforts and in the States, and then where we would go beyond that. So it's the formality of the conversation is right on track. So I work with the Grand Canyon Trust, which is based out of Flagstaff, but our offices are across the Colorado Plateau. And through the Grand Canyon Trust is our Native America program. And under our Native America program, we have a delegation that we call the Colorado Plateau Intertribal Conversations Group, which is CPIC. And it's made up of 12 tribes that live on the Colorado Plateau in the Four Corners region. And these the CPIC gathering members are individuals that possess or that have knowledge of traditional teachings, that have traditional knowledge of the cornfield, or have knowledge of how to go from where we are at to where we want to go in the future for the generations ahead. And so we've taken on talking about the rights of nature in partner with Bioneers and partnered with Movement Rights and other folks. And so with the Colorado Plateau and Tribal Group, Conversations Group, we've really taken the step to educate ourselves and line that up with the traditional knowledge and the original instructions that we have. And it's really unique on the effort that we're doing because we have 12 tribes that are participating together, and having these tribes get the education of what the rights of nature is and how it's being implemented now and how it could be altered and shifted to accommodate what is needed on the Colorado Plateau has been very helpful for all the tribes to really gain an understanding and bring together what are the similarities amongst tribes on things, what are the differences amongst tribes on things, and how do we mesh those together moving forward on a rights of nature movement. So that's what that's the basis of what we've been working on. And so moving forward, looking at how the next couple of years will play out with the rights of nature on the Colorado Plateau. One of the first things that we determined in our region is not to go straight for a designation and to designate an element or to designate a subject for rights of nature. As tribes that live in the Colorado Plateau and the Southwest, we've been impacted heavily by resource extractive industries. We've been impacted heavily by reservation shrinkings or homeland shrinkings. And there's so many impacts that we face that introducing another environmental policy or a policy may be hard or may be difficult to understand the capacity of where it could go and how it could be applicable in a positive way for tribes. So what we decided as a group of intertribal entities is we would like to educate. We wanted to educate our tribes, our communities. We want to educate ourselves on our foundational structure. What I explained earlier, Kara, about how we identified our original instructions from all the tribes. We wanted to educate ourselves because even though we're tribal members, we live in our communities, many times our tribal leaders, our tribal state leaders, or even state leaders or national leaders don't have that education. So building that education of an original instruction, the traditional teachings first, and then bringing in the education about rights of nature and bringing in all these different components of understanding color representation, understanding the prayers and the songs to the level that it brings attributes or it brings the liveliness of water, of the air, of the plants, of the ecosystem that we live in, and educating the communities that we come from of these two and how they fit parallel with one another, and how these parallel fittings could establish a policy that is created by Indigenous communities, that is empowering community, and that is situated to not only protect environment or to protect ecosystems or subject, but to re-alter the thinking of of how we place ourselves back into those systems of our community of a landscape. And so that's what we're working on right now on the Colorado Plateau is creating the place for those education seminars. We were establishing 4 educational seminars across the Colorado Plateau. So that's New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. And tribes are very positioned in different parts of in this region. So we have to go out to visit them and give the education to them. And so with COVID really impacting our communities, that took a step back. So now we're really thinking innovatively on how we can present the traditional teachings, how we can present the rights of nature, and how we're going to bring these together to work in a respectful manner. That's all happening now on the Colorado Plateau with us. We're going to bring this education to the communities. And what we are expecting is feedback from the communities on some of the things that we've missed. We're looking to get feedback on some of the things that are how to protect intellectual property knowledge. We have to look at things like how do we make sure that these policies are proactive and they're not, it's just a rights of nature designation doesn't just mean it's a policy that's filed away to use further down, keeping it very proactive and keeping it very much alive and a living policy for communities. Those are all feedback that we're looking at from community members because, you know, one of our aunts, one of our uncles, one of our grandfathers would be attending this and they would, you know, have some insights that we've never thought about. And so we're reaching back to the community to get that information. At the same time, on the Colorado Plateau, we do have some tribes that are very small, some tribes that are very large in population. So the levels of where tribes are in moving policies within their own tribal sovereign governments and where they are moving things intertribally are at different scales. So we're really looking at how we can manage one tribe wanting to move fast and moving forward as a way to protect the landscape, possibly from uranium mining, possibly from nuclear development. And so we're really making sure we take the right steps and we're making sure that we are working with tribes in a way that respects their need, as well as respects their size, their population, and their level of traditional knowledge. Many tribes like to reserve and keep that knowledge within their own tribal communities. And so we're working with all of that to help us facilitate a larger conversation intertribally on the Colorado Plateau. And once we get to the level of education, when it's something that is understood across the Colorado Plateau with tribes, we're really looking to engage in a policy that is driven by the tribes with guidance and advisement by community members. And those policies that exist, those tribal policies, we'll definitely look into have them internally. So there's an understanding of how tribes can enforce their sovereignty and enforce and put in practicality tribal laws to protect a canyon, to protect a groundwater source, to protect a river. And then from there, we want to really dive into looking at how we can expand that sovereignty, expand that process out of our reservational boundaries and into more customary land use areas, more historical territories. So that's the kind of timeline we're looking at and how we're going forward on the Colorado Plateau. So folks from that region on the Colorado Plateau, from Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, if this is the first that you've heard of the rights of nature and the conversation, don't feel like you've been left out of the conversation or you've been left out of the education. We're still getting to that level of informing, and it's going to take some time for us, but we want to do it in a way that is facilitated and that is blessed by the tribes and in a way that is respectful. So it'll be, you'll be hearing more about how these education seminars will take place down the road. So that's some of the things that we're working on, Kara, and some things to share with you on how in detailed and how in-depth we've become in identifying or understanding the pillars of the rights of nature to where we're looking at long-term with the goals ahead.
You're muted, Kara.
I keep doing that. We went through a very similar process that we spoke to earlier about seeing how rights of nature, rights of Mother Earth really speaks to traditional Indigenous values. And then, we started taking a look at our boilerplate constitution at Chemehuevi and having these community meetings where we began to sit down and talk about all the things that we wanted protected in perpetuity that we don't currently have enshrined in our tribal laws. And they were really like just amazing conversations. And we had bigger questions than that. We had bigger questions about pushback for codifying the laws into our tribal constitutions, not only from within, but that potential pushback from outside. We saw that there were two avenues that we could protect and enshrine these laws, like within the reservation, or what might be called customary laws, where they could be enacted and enforced within the reservation. But what we were really interested was seeing like, how can we create constitutional amendments that are then enforceable off the reservation? So if we have all of these big ideas of tribal sovereignty and nation to nation consultation with the federal government, are we able to enshrine laws that protect the Colorado River and protect the water for the many municipalities around through adopting them through our constitution? And one question begat more questions, like what if all of the tribes along the Colorado River did the same thing? So we began to speak about going back to this idea of our constitutions. There are so many tribes that have the same 1934 IRA constitution. And so in creating all of these, educational conversations, we identified that it might be really helpful to create a methodology. So as we're creating this for the first time for ourselves, be thinking of the many, which is, is one way that we approach things. That's what Dion and everybody were kind of speaking to. We share information, we share resources. This is our traditional way of doing things. And so this methodology that we create could then be adopted into many constitutions. And that's the work that we're really engaged in right now. We need legal consultation to understand not how to govern ourselves. We have that down. We understand what it is to self-determine and self-govern, but how can we create constitutional language and the amendments that can be the most powerful and the most enforceable, both on the reservation and off the reservation, and all the other questions that many nations have. Some of us are resource extracting tribes. Tribes have the same questions as outside entities. And I think that that's important to consider. Like, many of us do have extractive industries within our economies. And how do we just transition from those while we go back to what many of us feel are the right ways? And so that's really where we're at with the work that we're doing through the Pioneers Indigeneity program, is trying to create open source, if you will, methodology that other tribes can pick up. And we're creating workbooks so that we can start teaching people how to teach it in their own communities so that they can self-determine, like, if this is a good fit for them and their tribe is like our tribe, then, maybe we can all do it. Alexis. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to jump in because we're at an hour and we can clearly go on and on and on. We have a lot of people who've asked a lot of questions. So I'm wondering if we can jump into the QA time, because I know people kind of will start to get off because about 90 minutes or less. And I don't want to lose people. People are really engaged in hearing what everybody has to say. And I wanted to ask the questions so that Kara can also be a part of answering them and not just asking the question. So one question we have is if anyone knows or is aware of any successful or unsuccessful rights of Mother Earth arguments in litigation at the state or federal level.
I do a little bit. And I'm sure I see Penny nodding, so she's probably got some. Oh no, okay. There has been litigation, threats of litigation to municipalities and cities adopting rights of nature. It has not yet been tested with this model that we're looking at with sovereign nation to nation, with tribes adopting rights of nature in their tribal constitutions. However, to that end, Kara alluded to this, we are actually conducting legal research with a team of lawyers who specialize in the several different intersections of specialized law that this actually addresses. And so I also wanted to add that the frameworks that we are building to support tribal capacity building has been led by a couple sets of working groups of about 20 leaders in this area who comprise of tribal leaders, grassroots organizers, and lawyers who practice several different types of law. So, so if there are folks listening to this webinar who would like some support, would like to attend a workshop, learn from what we've been studying and we've been guided by for the past few years here, don't be shy to reach out to Kara and I. But no, short answer, not yet tested.
So I thought we were just talking about tested for tribes. And I just want to add one piece to what you said, Alexis, and that is that in the beginning of doing this work with communities, not tribes, that there were years, literally years, where there was no response, there was no federal response, there was no corporate response. And the first response did come from corporations through the state. So I think that, you know, it's good for us all to keep in mind that it may seem like we're like moving forward in a really good way and really strong, but we always have to be mindful of if the shoe's going to drop, or however you say that, if something's going to happen, then we need to be prepared for that.
Thank you. We have somebody who read a futuristic book called The Marrow Thieves in particular, and where it's a future reality where the Great Lakes are destroyed and extracted from as a water resource, leaving the lakes murky and devastated. So this is a fictional novel. So, but do you think this event could be possible in Earth's timeline? And if so, what are ways we can use activism to prevent it?
I think that that's maybe a fictional novel, but not really a fictional scenario. And one of the things that we say a lot is that Standing Rock is everywhere. And while that was an awakening moment for many people to see what the extractive industry is doing, because it's something that goes invisible in the media oftentimes, Indigenous peoples around the globe are fighting that. So that's a fictional story based in reality is what I would say to that. And I would say that those movements, you'll often find Indigenous peoples on the front lines. And I also believe that those movements should be Indigenous led. So get behind your Indigenous nonprofits and activist groups would be my recommendation.
Could I also just make a quick response to that? I think it's also important. This rights of nature movement is not just a fixed effort. It is an effort to help shift the mentality or to help change the response that we have as human people to our environment, to the landscape. And so when we think of fictional novels like this in a real situation, it's going to continue to happen when our mind and our mentality is not set the way we are looking at, this rights of nature effort. And we can't always throw a policy in to protect all the time. We have to start shifting the mindset of our relationship to the landscape and communities we come from. So this effort is not just a policy effort, it's an effort to start shifting directions so we don't come up with these situations like what was just asked. Just something to add on.
And
I'm going to add, a minute here. Just a quick response to that is
Mm-hmm.
that it already has happened in different places. I'm calling in from the ancestral territory of the Rums and Ohlone, also known as Monterey, that also has the most expensive water in the country. And yet people who live in Pebble Beach can bypass all of our water laws because they're hyper wealthy in their 8th house. And it happened, and I saw it when Kara and I went and visited Dion and many of the people he works with on the Colorado Plateau. And we went to the Navajo and Hopi reservations, and we were on Second Mesa, and we went down into a canyon that used to be lush, full of peaches and fields, and had spring water, and you could just drink out of it. But due to the slurry and the mining that sucked up all the underground water aquifers, whole communities and their ways of life have been completely devastated. So it's already happened, and it's happening in probably in many places right now.
Someone asked that, well, one, they wanted to give a compliment to everybody that they love the content, they love what everybody is saying, and they really thank you both, all of you, for being part of this. But their question is, what advice or insight would be for a non-Indigenous actors who want to support the rights of nature movement or follow along this sort of pathway? And what can they do to support Indigenous-led movement? Non-Indigenous actor, what can they do?
I live in an urban area in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm on occupied Lishan Ohlone land. And I can tell you that as a result of all the work that Indigenous, mostly women, have been doing around the fossil fuel corridor that exists here, that we have literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of allies and accomplices that work with us. And so I would suggest that you look to the Indigenous people where you are and ask them how you can help. I mean, that's always the best thing, I think, for anybody to do, whether you're in a rural area or an urban area, that, you know, Indigenous people, especially Indigenous women around the world, are leading a lot of this, not only this movement, but the climate justice movement. And I also just want to say that for the people watching, if you're not doing anything yet, if you haven't decided how you're going to help prevent the very worst from happening here, that we're out of time. And I encourage people to bring what your gifts are, what inspires you, what talents that you have, and bring that to us. Bring it to us. We're out of time. Everybody must be doing something at this point. And we have a good time.
Another question is, can rights of nature be used to also strengthen human rights? She can see, this person can see that establishing rights of nature would benefit access to clean water, air, land, etc. But are there also intersections between establishing rights of nature and human rights in relation to the issues such as police violence or other similar issues?
So one of the things that we say in our movements is that what happens to the land happens to the body. And this is also an Indigenous worldview and original instruction, if you will, that another way that Indigenous-led movements have a great understanding of the interdependence of all life. And absolutely, you know, by supporting rights of nature and the protection of the earth, it protects the people and all of its children.
Thank you. How much pushback is there within tribal governments to codify some of these rights of nature?
So if anybody else wants to jump in, the only one that I've heard of really comes around this, maybe help me out, Alexis, but just our traditional values and our traditional teachings don't really ever meet up with legal constructs, like Western legal constructs. So, you know, what we find ourselves is always like trying to mitigate or trying to attempt to translate and work within these legal constructs that truly don't work for our tribes. So by accepting these legal constructs, we've already gone in the wrong direction, adopting rights of nature into legal frameworks. And that's like something that you have to be really aware of. I think people that are working to continue to adopt rights of nature into our existing legal constructs are operating from a place of we must do something and we must do something now.
I think you nailed it, Kara. And I think also one thing to keep in mind with this codification is progress, not perfection. Like one of the cruxes of this pushback is, well, how are we going to get it right? And what if we get the language wrong? What about future generations? What if we don't do it right now? But there are people, tribal leaders who believe we have to do something now and just do it so that we can start to spread the movement, demonstrate that it can be done for those tribes for which they think it might be right for them, that want to explore it for themselves. It's not right for everybody. And I know Dion knows a lot about this too.
Alexis, well, I was just going to add one section or one component. A thought to that question was that we have to identify that we as human people are not separated from any system, that we are a part of every system. And in order for us to understand that and to shift in our behaviors, that we have to see ourselves as a factor to the whole, and indicating that nature has rights, a river has rights, a cedar tree has rights. Doesn't mean that we are identifying each entity or life as rights. So we shouldn't start assigning rights and siloing everything to having legal law rights. Instead, it's understanding that altogether as a system, we are protecting that system under the rights of life, not of specifics of human, of nature, of a tree, of a river, of a mountain range. It's understanding that component, because if we start looking at and dissecting and creating these silos of rights for humans, rights for trees, then that's also putting us back in the same mentality and the same position of not understanding our place in these systems. So we have to really understand that this movement of rights of nature, and that's the foundations and the cultural teachings, is not just creating more laws and more policies for protection. It's integrating those life systems that already exist and re-acknowledging, invigorating them back into society to move forward. So I just wanted to make sure that that's shared, because it's not just allocating more laws of protection or more policies of protection. It's more than that.
So hopping on that, somebody would like to hear a little bit more about how then the tribunals work in this situation for the rights of nature.
A tribunal can be one issue or it can be several issues. And the issues are around the harms. And so there's a person who's identified, and it's usually, one of us, who is in support of whatever the harm is, like a corporate attorney. And then there's a panel of judges. And then there is the person who speaks on behalf of the ecosystem, the area that is being harmed. And so people can hear both sides of what this issue is, from the corporate side and the system side. And then the panel of judges make a determination afterwards. They're long. I mean, it can last for days. It can last for one day or several days. And I think that there are videos on the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature website at therightsofnature.org that people can see. They're very educational. So that's how that works.
Thank you. What about groups that are working around issues of environment in their particular state, but they don't have tribal support yet? What suggestions do you have to join forces with tribes to work across and move across the state on environmental issues and battles?
Alexis, would you like to talk a little bit why it's important that these movements are Indigenous led?
Yeah. first of all, I heard the question as a non-Indigenous group doing something in like a municipality or a city seeking tribal support. So I think, I mean, obviously for our own communities, it has to be led by us. So if you are seeking tribal support, don't tell them how to do it. Let them do it themselves their way. That would be for one. But the other, I think the broader point that this gets at for me is that we do at some point need to coalesce forces beyond tribal boundaries, because what happens on tribal land is also going to be affected by codes and regulations off tribal land. And there needs to be some kind of synergy or movement making together. And not only that, but the more people who are working to do this at a grassroots level, whether as part of a tribe or another organization, and the more people getting the word out there to make the public aware and shift the public dialogue on why this is so important, the more that's going to seep into popular consciousness, which is the exact type of thing that's going to influence a judge when things get challenged in court and litigation to not vote against it, as they have been doing at the state level that Penny pointed out before. So I know I didn't exactly answer how to do it, but I would first thing, learn as much as you can, read up on allyship, read up on accomplishship. Don't cause them to do any labor for you when they're already so busy doing their own thing, and reach out with an open heart and figure out when the time is right. And like Penny said, ask, how can I help? Does anyone else want to add to that?
Another question is curious about securing corn seeds our corn seeds. This is probably an Indigenous person. Curious about securing our corn seeds to protect them by legally patenting them for tribes growing the ancestral seeds. How would seed security fit into the rights of nature? They're asking tough questions, great questions, aren't they?
I'll take a little stab at that. That is a really good question, and that has been something that has been discussed. There's actually our current case, or our current rights of nature designation to the seeds out in the Midwest. And one of the things that's brought up, so living in the Southwest, we have the Hopi, the Zuni, the Navajo tribes who have heirloom seeds. And there's a fear of Monsanto taking those genetic genes of those seeds or altering those seeds or shifting out the seeds. There's definitely a concern with our heirloom seeds here in the Southwest. But one of the things that's really tough to identify on looking at the rights of heirloom seeds or the rights of corn, squash, beans, is that those seeds are have cultural protocols that are different across all tribes. And it's really hard to try to attach a policy or to attach a law to something so sacred that has its own cultural properties, because the seeds, as a living being, as a living ancestor to our current lifestyles, takes many forms. For example, the corn seed kernel is not just a corn seed kernel. It goes into the traditional uses of mush, of powder, takes on different forms and food and dietary needs. And so trying to identify a policy that protects that is very tough to try to try to align with current protection policies like Kira mentioned. Sometimes these things don't fall in line with one another, and that's one of the cases. And it's really tough to try to identify and navigate those types of situations unless it's a wild grass seed like what's happening in the Midwest. That has a different situation. But we've looked at that from the Southwest, looking at having the rights of our traditional heirloom corn, squash, and bean seeds to be protected. But we've come across really tough questions to be answered and addressed on how those protection policies would stand in a legal situation as opposed to a cultural situation and settings. And as Penny mentioned, the time is running out to try to have those types of conversations, but that's something that has been discussed in our area of and conversations to rights of nature, as well as the rights to protecting our traditional foods and our traditional food ways. So that conversation is happening as well, just as a way to reflect to that question.
Thank you. So we're about out of time, so I'll ask one more question from the listeners, and then I'll just let everybody give maybe one final quick wrap up before we say goodbye. So the final question is, we have many questions, we couldn't get to all of them, but overall in general, people really, really appreciated this panel and learned a lot. So the question is, do you see our current Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, as being an advocate for this movement?
Alexis and I created this task force of legal consultants on the rights of nature before Deb Haaland was nominated and then placed as the Secretary of Interior. And in 2019, we actually went to visit her in her Albuquerque office, where she did show support for the rights of nature and interest in being a consultant on our working group at that time. Since then, her life has taken her in a whole new area, but we're very hopeful as Native Americans to have our first Native American overseeing the Department of Interior, which has a very long history of negative relationship with Indian communities, Native American communities throughout the United States. So she is here again working within a legal construct that does not swing in our favor or have many advantageous ways for Native American law and beliefs to thrive, but we know that having her in there is a huge change, and I do believe that she will support rights of nature as she sees it come through her office.
Thank you. So would everybody like to just give one final statement on whatever you would like to say to people? We've got activists, we've got environmentalists, we've got Indigenous, non-Indigenous, we've got people from different countries as well, learning and listening from this topic. So I'll start with you, Alexis.
My final statement is thank you, Vision Maker Media, for bringing us all together to do this, and that I am very hopeful and positive that this movement is really going to help shift the dial on a lot of things that are happening right now.
Thank you. Penny?
Thank you. I also thank Vision Makers Media and Pioneers and the other panelists. It's been wonderful to hear all of you. And I just want to say that movementrights.org has a number of videos, webinars on rights of nature, original instructions that people can access at any time. And then there's also a lot of really good information at rightsofnature.org. And thank you. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate the time.
Dion?
I also would like to just say thank you from New Mexico. And I also just wanted to say that, this rights of nature movement and initiative is inherently us as Indigenous folks really stepping up to the plate with what our ancestors had provided for us, meaning to go out and understand where we come from, who you are, getting an education and bringing that back to empower and to strengthen ourselves as Indigenous communities, Indigenous people, and our landscapes. And I see that in this with the rights of nature movement, and not so much as a Western policy or a Western initiative or law. And because of that, I feel like there's a good way of approaching this with the songs, prayers, and blessings from all tribes to look at and dissect this into a way that we can color it in any way we want that would help manifest and provide for directions going forward. And that's just something that I wanted to share, and to also say that under our organization's website, grandcanyontrust.org, will also be some information on our education seminars as they are planned out and moving forward. If you'd like to stay up to date with what we're doing in our region, that's the website to go to as well. So thank you, everyone. Yeah.
And our precious moderator, thank you. I just first want to thank Kara very much for agreeing to collaborate with us, but would you have some final words you'd like to share?
Francine, thank you so much for inviting us to do this. We need all of the visibility that we can get. And, you know, here in California and the West, we are facing the first ever federal declaration on a water shortage of the Colorado River. And so the future is here. We need to act fast. We need to balance promises and the challenges that we're going to face all together. We really need to get behind Indigenous communities. And one of the things that we've identified in our working group that's going to be the biggest help that Alexis was alluding to is this change in public opinion, this change in public perception about rights of nature not being a very abstract thing at all, and really has the potential to protect our environment against extractive industry and pollution in ways that we've never seen and that we're going to need desperately in the next couple of years. So thank you.
Yes, and thank you.
Happy Earth Day.
Yes, happy Earth Day. And thank you also, Alexis, Penny, and Dion, for your participation. I mean, everybody just made this whole panel extremely robust, very interesting, and just meaningful by talking about the work that you did and sharing it with everybody. And I just want to say for everybody, if you want to learn more, you want to see more about what's going on from Vision Maker Media with Environmental Month, our topic is community, environment, and sacred. We have a list of films, and we also have recorded this panel so people can watch it and share it with your friends or with others. 24-hour streaming for free on our website at visionmakermedia.org. And for people who are interested, there were some people who are interested in either engaging with each of you individually or just learning more or wanting to support the work that you also do at Pioneers through your program. Kara, do you want to share with them how they can participate or learn or contribute?
Sure, please visit, I was checking to make sure I wasn't muted. Visit our Pioneers/Indigeneity landing page, find out about our 5 different initiatives. And sometimes we are always having growing edges. We also create new media, Indigenous-centric media for social change, educational curriculum. We have a Native youth leadership program. We promote traditional ecological knowledge, rights of nature, and are known for the world-renowned Indigenous Forum each year, which has gone virtual for 2020 and 2021. We look forward to gathering with you at the Pioneers Annual Conference in the future. And write to us at natives@pioneers.org, and you'll hear back from Alexis and I.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, everybody who was listening and participating as well on this crucial and very, very important topic about our world and our environment. So everybody, good night.
Thank you.